Previously on GameSoup.
Monster loot operates on a variable ratio schedule. You don't know how many monsters you need to kill until the next great item drop. Diablo 3 has 17 separate difficulty levels. I think a race car is just a bicycle in disguise. Diablo 3's blood shards are essentially a fixed ratio currency.
And now, a poem. Dark Lord is red. Please give me free.
Not even death can save you from me.
So far, we've examined ratio scheduling in hack-and-slash games, but this is only one method of conditioning the player. We can also use fixed and variable interval scheduling, which instead of counting a ratio, the number of responses from a player, cares only about how much time has passed. This is what we alluded to above when we talked about blood shards. Your blood shard income is so consistent over time that it might as well be on a timer. Ever play a free-to-play game that gates your progress based on some stamina bar that limits how many things you can do in a single day? Or how about a popular digital card game that only gives you a new quest every 24 hours? This kind of stimulus tends to produce long-term behavioral changes that are not as frequent as ratio scheduling, but are much more likely to stick over a long period of time. Imagine that you log on to Hearthstone every single day to complete a quest, but today all the clocks, watches, and cell phones in your house suddenly stopped working, and you have no way to tell time. After you complete today's quest, you know that you won't be getting another one for many hours, so you don't check again tonight after dinner. You also don't check before you go to bed, but you might check when you wake up at 6 a.m. if you think 24 hours have elapsed. If there's no quest yet, you'll check again at 7. Then you might check at 7:45, at 8:30, at 9, 9:30, 9:45, 10, 10:05, 10:08. The point is that as you get closer and closer to the time when you know that a reward will be given, you're increasingly likely to perform the behavior that you know leads to the reward. You can see here that as time passes, the number of responses from the subject increases in frequency. It's the same reason that when you gain a level in a game like Path of Exile, you don't feel the need to glance down at the experience bar every 5 seconds. You know that you pretty much have an entire level to gain. But once you're up near 70% or so, you might find yourself checking more and more frequently to see how close you really are to that next level. Sort of like a watched pot that never boils. That's fixed interval scheduling. Variable interval scheduling is similar, except that the timing isn't ever concrete, which, like variable ratio scheduling, makes it much more compelling for the player. Try to think of a game where you get a new quest every day at the same time. If you know that you can only get one quest every 24 hours, you might only log in once a day just to complete it. But if instead you got a new quest after a random amount of hours, say between 1 and 24 hours after your first login, you'd be checking in with the game a lot more frequently than just once a day. Who knows, you could be really lucky and get 10 quests in a day, each a couple hours apart, and that is the reward that will encourage you to keep checking up frequently in the future. This is the reason that variable interval scheduling is so addicting. It's easy to get excited about extra rewards when all you have to do is log in and check, so you end up responding consistently over a long period of time until the reward is given to you. The trick with interval scheduling is to find the sweet spot where the player is constantly trying to catch up, but never gets so discouraged from bad luck or mechanics that they just give up playing the game altogether. It's a bit like stretching a rubber band as far as you possibly can without snapping it. Back to our chart, take a look at the delta times, the intervals between drops. Diablo 3 also has this pity timer function. But here, it's an example of fixed interval scheduling. As long as you're slaying monsters, there's an invisible timer active, which resets whenever you get a legendary drop. But if this timer is triggered, you'll be guaranteed to get a legendary the next time it's possible. Unlike variable ratio scheduling, it doesn't matter how many monsters you kill in 30 minutes, only that you've been hacking away at it for some amount of time. Travis Day, one of Diablo 3's designers, revealed several years ago that this pity timer is about 2 hours long. But in reality, the pity timer only matters for leveling a new character to 70, since progress can be pretty slow. Anyone playing endgame at level 70 is virtually guaranteed to get legendary drops in a rather steady drip feed. Let's compare this pity timer to our data. Depending on whether you're leveling or at the endgame, the space between points, which represents the time interval between legendaries, could be anywhere from extremely small, less than a minute or a second, to extremely large. But these are the valleys, or the droughts, that make that legendary item drop just a little more exciting. And that's the role of the pity timer. It mitigates the droughts and the spikes of randomness, smoothing out the rate of reward when considered over a long period of time. In this case, the pity timer will try to filter out the widest gap between item drops, as long as that gap approaches 2 hours. Fixed interval scheduling, like the pity timer, can actually threaten the core gameplay loop of a hack and slash, because it has the potential to take you out of the experience. To illustrate this, imagine that there were no random drops in Diablo 2. Instead, there was only a clock that repeatedly ticked down from 30 minutes. and a legendary item would only ever drop when that timer hit 0. If the only thing that mattered was the time that you sunk into the game, then it wouldn't matter if you had good gear or not, just as long as you sat in front of a monitor and clicked a bunch. There would be a greatly diminished sense of progression, because you didn't have to actively struggle against randomness, and the game would be a lot less fun from moment to moment. This is why the pity timer works so well, but only as a backup to the game's variable ratio scheduling. And in the cases where the pity timer actually matters, it's activated invisibly and silently so that the player has no idea. They might just think that they've finally broken an unlucky streak. The pity timer is implemented extremely well. The variable ratio foundation of the game isn't affected at all, but player engagement over time is more likely to remain high, because the rubber band becomes a little less likely to snap under tension. By and large, hack and slashes take the carrot-on-a-stick approach, with well-tailored randomness being the stick that not only helps you persevere through highs and lows to get your reward, but also to feel satisfaction when you finally do get that carrot. Even though it helps us understand games like Diablo or Path of Exile, the Skinner box comparison we've used here is maybe a bit too simplistic to adequately encompass and describe the massively complex mechanical systems that these games employ today. And sure, we can look at these individual mechanics under a lens, but what's arguably more important is how each individual element contributes to the whole during gameplay. And it's this synergy that has encouraged so many players to pour hundreds and hundreds of hours into smashing monsters and watching loot just explode everywhere.
Hey, it's me again. We need to give very special thanks for all of our patrons on Patreon. So without further ado, Alchemic, Cyber Dryad, John Hathaway, Julian Detris, Sam Myers, Delicious IB, Austin Yarger, C. Bomber, David Lopez, Hector Manuel Carrillo, or is it Carrillo? Sebastian Becker, Useless Torch Studios, Moogle Girl, Cat Prog, Arno Benefice, Brian Hinson, Atlas Jackson, and Brian Feral Pony Feeney. Thank you all for supporting us. And even if you're not a patron with us yet, you can still go to our Patreon page and get weekly updates about what's coming up on the channel. So until next time, thanks for watching GameSoup.